Howdy, and welcome to Shop Talk, an insightful series of conversations brought to you by Kimray and Kathairos Solutions, discussing all things oilfield facilities, process controls, pneumatics, and emissions. We're coming from you today from the Kimray headquarters here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I'm John Bunky Westerhide, the Chief Revenue Officer of Kathairos Solutions, and I am joined by Kyle Andrews, the Sales Enablement Manager for Kimray. And trust me when I say that Kyle knows his stuff when it comes to process controls and pneumatics. So in today's conversation, we're going to be talking about how process controls, pneumatics, and how you implement them, and putting a little extra forethought into that as you're going through designing a new facility or looking at retrofitting and changing existing facilities, how you can turn process controls and pneumatics from an afterthought into an asset and really optimize things like reliability, safety, and data-driven transparency in your operations. So to start us off, Kyle, really, can you help describe the role of process controls and pneumatics within oilfield facilities, both in the upstream and midstream?
Yeah, I mean they're everything. To put it simply, it's not something that you think about or maybe put a lot of thought into normally. They're just there. They're doing their job. They're working.
Kind of like light switches.
Like light switches, right? And until something goes wrong, it may not be something that you put a lot of thought into. But when it does go wrong and things break down and you have systems go down, then it's really important, right? But a little bit of forethought, a little bit of time spent thinking about your needs, how you want to execute those solutions, the solution itself. A little bit of forethought in that can save you a lot of time down the road, a lot of downtime. And just a little bit of preparedness goes a long way.
Right. And Kimray, as sort of a world leader in the space of process control and pneumatic actuation and devices, can you talk about some of the applications where these process controls, what roles they play, what they do, and what you've seen over the last 75 plus years of Kimray's history and leading in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to tell people that I'm training, Kimray really is in 4 spaces within the oil and gas industry. So we can control flow, pressure, temperature, and liquid level. And all 4 of those things can be done pneumatically and typically are done pneumatically. And so, those are 4 very important things. And so we have a lot of different products that make up those 4 applications, most of which are pneumatic. And so when you're talking about, deciding on alternatives to natural gas supply, all of those applications fit within that. And it's, probably 90+% of what's out there and what we sell is pneumatics.
Right. And I mean, with my experience in the oil field, even though it may be limited, those 4 things sound like kind of everything.
Yeah.
In these remote, applications, production applications or midstream applications. If you can't control flow, temperature, pressure, and liquid level, you don't have control of your site, right?
Absolutely.
And so it speaks to the criticality. So when oilfield operators, facility engineers, the people that are designing these facilities, what are some major considerations around process controls or pneumatic actuation that they need to consider when they're thinking about implementing a new site or even retrofitting a existing site, to make sure that they optimize how these sites run?
Yeah. Reliability is probably number 1. Whatever solution you do select, you want to make sure that it's going to work when you need it to work. And with some solutions, you might have to have a backup to your solution or a backup to your backup, right? But with something like nitrogen, it's always there. It's going to be reliable. You're not going to have breakdowns. So reliability is number one in my mind and what people need to consider. Um, and availability too. You want to make sure that it's a solution that you can implement and then implement at scale, right? Because we're not just replacing, one location, right? We are, especially if you are trying to achieve, certain emissions goals and you're on a pretty strict timeline, you're going to need to implement a solution pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so, doing something like nitrogen, making sure that the product is available and is able to scale well is very important as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe pulling on that thread just a little bit more around reliability, given the vast amount of experience that you and your company have, what are some of the reasons why a process control would fail or a pneumatic would fail, sort of a disrupt, if you will?
Yeah.
Can you talk about those failure modalities and then, items or ways that those can sort of be overcome?
Yep. So the biggest thing that our pneumatics fight with and, tend to make components fail are wet or dirty gas. That's kind of number one. Um, Cold ambient temperatures are another one. And that kind of also goes along with wet gas. So when you have wet supply gas, there are small orifices and other sensitive instrumentation that are in our controls that are sensitive to that wet gas. So it's best if you have a clean, dry source of pneumatics. And so if you're in a cold environment, like if you're in North Dakota and you're trying to operate in the middle of winter,
Yep.
and you've got wet supply gas, you've got some moisture in that supply gas, it's going to freeze, especially in the sensing line and small tubing of our regulators. So those are, some common failure points of, that come along with pneumatics.
Yeah.
And controls.
And at Kathairos Solutions, we hear about that all the time from our customers. In fact, internally, we jokingly say winter is coming, right? Which is a reference to the fact that these pneumatic actuated process controls do have challenges with freeze ups when a cold front moves in.
Yeah.
Our solution though, we've had operating at negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit up in, northern Alberta, British Columbia. And the great thing about that clean, dry, inert source gas to actuate these controls is the fact that there's no liquid in it. There's no chance of freeze up. So, that failure modality that you just mentioned, that's common in these cold weather climates or cold weather months, is completely eliminated.
Yep.
With nitrogen. What are some other, failure modalities that operators can think of, not only from a single point source or process control, but when they're thinking about 10 sites, 100 sites, 1,000 sites, and thousands of devices that they need to make sure are operating reliably and consistently in these remote operations?
Yeah. So when we first started, looking at and partnering with Kathairos, a big thing that came up and what our sales team kind of ran into was compressed air versus nitrogen. And it's something that you've talked about before too, but when you look at equipping a location with compressed air, that compressor might have a total runtime of 99%, 98%, which seems great for a single location, but when you multiply that by hundreds of locations, right, that means if it's a 2% downtime or even 1% downtime, but you've got 100 locations, that means one of those compressors is going to be down all of the time, right? And so there's constant maintenance. You have to have the personnel to service those things, and air compressors do come with other equipment, right, to dry the air, to condition it, to make sure that it's going to operate your controls well. And so looking at those two options, if reliability is the most important thing to you, having a solution that's already dry, inert, it's not going to freeze.
Yeah. No moving parts.
No moving parts, right?
Mechanical failure.
No maintenance required.
Right.
That's going to be the option that you want to go with.
Yeah, yeah, and we've seen that bear out in our own internal metrics at Kathairos. We're at over 29 million operating hours now across thousands of sites from northern Canada to South Texas, Pennsylvania to California, and our reliability or service availability is 99.994%, which is kind of crazy and extreme. But it goes back to the first principles of engineering, right? How do I create something that's reliable? Well, I engineer out failure points. And last time I checked, thermodynamics, a cryogenic liquid nitrogen turning into gaseous nitrogen in a 701 expansion ratio, that's an ultra reliable process. Yep. No outside electricity or power needs, no mechanical moving parts, etc. So it just works as long as there's liquid nitrogen in that tank, right? And that's a little bit of the secret to reliability. And then you couple that with the known quality and reliability and service of a Kimray pneumatic process control valve, and you got kind of the best of both worlds, right? And for those critical applications where you may have a 1,000-barrel-a-day facility, or you may be moving a ton of gas through a compression site, like a gathering site or a midstream transmission site, that reliability, a minute of downtime is valuable, let alone an hour or a day, right? Absolutely. And, it just speaks to the value of ensuring that you design for the system of reliability, not just the individual component reliability, and how you do it and standardize. And maybe that's another question for you, in working and consulting with your customers around process controls at these facilities. Talk about the importance of standardization, the ability to not just, have sort of a guess bag of what's out there controlling your sites, but really having a plan and how the correct process control selection and design actually becomes an asset for an organization.
Yeah. So when we're talking about multiple locations, it's really good to have the standard design because, one, you can train your people one time, right, on this is our process, this is our solution, and then you can implement that everywhere, right? It seems nowadays, and kind of depending on the company too, but nowadays everybody likes to run their locations differently. Even within the same company, you go from one basin to another. There might be different controls, different ways of, people doing things. So the more standard you can be, the more modular that solution is, and you can apply that in different areas. And so when we talk about pneumatic controls, the pneumatic controls are staying the same. They're not changing, which is great. Because you don't have to retrain your people on, okay, now you have to hire I&E techs, or you train people who've been in the industry for 30 years. You don't have to train them on, okay, what is this, electrical box that I'm looking at? Right?
Calibration,
things
right? Like that.
It's pneumatics, so they're used to that. And so you can apply that solution more easily and get buy-in more easily within your teams just with that fact alone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, pneumatic process controls in upstream operations, midstream operations are sort of, industry default, right? And when they've been controlling the way that we produce and transport oil and gas molecules for, decades, almost, approaching 100 years at this point, the idea of retraining the entire oil field on a new solution, new process control, can seem a little daunting, can seem a little disruptive, right, to your operations. So the ability to use that trusted design, but switch out the outside supply gas or supply energy that actuates that pneumatic from something like wellhead gas that can be clean, wet, cause a little bit of problems, to a nitrogen solution by just really unplugging one gas and plugging another gas in means it's a quick and easy change. You get the benefit of zero emissions, but you also get the comfort, the security of knowing what's out there and how to troubleshoot it, how to work with it, and how to keep your operations online.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another benefit to using Kathairos, as you mentioned, just you're unplugging one source supply, plugging in Kathairos. Nothing else is needed.
Right.
You can take existing supply gas systems, even if you're using wellhead gas, and maybe just with a couple of changes, you can plug it right in. And because it's an inert gas, you don't even have to purge anything.
That's right.
Even if you're switching from using nitrogen as a backup to your normal pneumatics, you don't have to purge lines. It can be done automatically. It takes over.
That's right.
And supplies.
And maybe just digging into that a little bit more, can you talk about the safety aspects of that?
Yeah.
Right? Versus maybe going with an instrument air solution where you could unintentionally create a air fuel mixture.
Right. Yeah. So you know the fire triangle, right? You don't wanna have the oxygen, the fuel, and then the heat source or spark, right? You want to take those things away from each other. So if you're using air, of course, there is always a chance that you're going to get mixture. Right. You know, if there's failures somewhere in the system, that you could mix the natural gas with oxygen, and then you're only a spark away from disaster. But with Kathairos, because it, and nitrogen, it is an inert gas.
Right.
And so even if those two things mix, which they don't normally do, but even if they did, you're still not going to run into a situation where, you could have a potential disaster.
You're right. So not only are you getting the benefits of ultra reliability, by coupling, Kimray designs and process controls with Kathairos zero emissions nitrogen solution, but you're actually getting a safety boost, right? To your operations. One thing that is important is we're in a moment as an industry where we are relooking at our facility designs. We're relooking at how we do things, not from, I would venture to say that if I went back to the 1970s and I looked at an oil field production facility here in Oklahoma, it would look basically the exact same as it does today, right? And there's been a lot of comfort to that standardization, repeatability, certainty of robust remote operations with the designs that we had decades ago. But the industry is now at a moment where we're continuously improving our environmental footprint, looking at things like the emissions, especially methane emissions associated with our operations. And as we know, one of the largest sources of methane emissions within upstream operations and midstream operations are the tiny amounts of methane from natural gas that are used today within pneumatic process controls, right? So it's really kind of daunting to think about switching things out, moving from something that we've trusted for decades and going to something different. But that's the world we live in right now. So maybe talk about how you would advise an operator, a facility engineer, when they're thinking about, man, I got to change from what I'm doing and what I know to thinking about these 10 sites, these 100 sites, these 1,000 sites, and just the change management aspect of that.
Yeah, I mean, things are changing now to where producers are taking production from individual well locations and going to centralized facilities.
Right.
Right. And so now you have a scenario where if that facility goes down, it's affecting multiple well locations.
Right.
Because everything's feeding into one system and, into one set of separators. And so, again, reliability, is a big thing. And so I think now when people are designing facilities, they're taking reliability into consideration more because it is one set of separation that could be controlling, 6, 7, 8, 20 wells at a time. And so
thousands of barrels.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, an hour of downtime on that central facility is a lot of lost revenue. Whereas a single well location downtime, is not going to affect you as much. And so I think nowadays people are considering reliability, safety. I think fewer controls can do more nowadays.
Yep.
But again, making sure that you have the correct solutions in place, putting again more thought into what you're choosing before you even design the facility. And good thing, and I mentioned it before about nitrogen, is you don't really have to change a whole lot about your design.
Right.
Even retrofitting, the Kathairos solution into an existing location is easy.
Yep. Yep. And it's really hard to escape the fact that the world we live in today, there's sensors everywhere. There's monitors. There's data streams.
There's people looking at you.
There's people looking at you, right? There's considerations there, but having insight into how your process controls are operating, just things as simple as vent rate, number of cycles. Can you talk about how insight to those data streams provide the ability to optimize process control structures and things like that?
So with a pneumatic system, with any pneumatic system, your vent rate, even if you don't have nitrogen, vent rate is something that people are keeping an eye on, right? Because that's what all the regulations are based off of, and that's what you have to track.
Right.
And so knowing your actuation cycles, knowing how big the actuator is, what the volume that you're venting each time that valve moves, that's important. And so I would say most producers know those numbers pretty well now.
Right.
And so when you're going to nitrogen, that's a pretty easy thing to convert. Okay, I know what my pneumatics are venting. I know what size tank I need to accommodate that. But then also all of the telemetry that's built into the Kathairos tanks can give you a lot of insights into, okay, I know my standard vent rate, and now I'm seeing that it's gone way up, right? I'm using more nitrogen than I should be. Something's going on there. Let me send somebody out and check that out. And hey, maybe you had a busted diaphragm. And so it was just venting out continuously that nitrogen. And so it can give you a lot of insights on maybe we need to increase our PM schedule, maybe, specific instances of sending people out to check on things that seem out of the norm.
That's right.
Yeah.
And with, that telemetry built into each one of the Kathairos Solutions tanks and the launch of our new Kathairos Atlas platform, which brings all that data into sort of a single pane, a single screen, letting you see operational performance, but also importantly for, maybe the non-facilities people, but the air people, the compliance folks, the environmental teams, is that data really informs them as to the investment in progress they're making around things like emissions reduction. And what we're seeing with our customers, that beyond just what you were talking about, which is operational performance, how do I continually improve? How do I look at my PM cycles and adjust them based off of the information I'm receiving? But the air teams, these compliance teams, rather for regulatory reasons or just voluntary reasons, have ways of now showing exactly how much methane they've reduced, exactly understanding, hey, this site with these characteristics, this liquid cut, if you will, or gas to oil ratio, well, it has a vent rate like this, right? And versus a dry gas play that I may have in another basin, it has a vent rate like this, or these 4 wells on this site versus this 1 well pad, right? So you can get an idea of optimizing design just gleaning from the data that is being pulled from these telemetry systems. And in a world where we're talking about shipping molecules to Europe via LNG and European emissions frameworks, or even things like OGMP 2.0, that idea that you can take the measurements coming off the Kathairos tanks that are running gas through the Kimray valves, and then come up with an accurate picture that you can report out. Just exactly, hey, we invested in this performance, and now we are bringing the receipts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. People are getting the receipts in more ways than one.
That's right. That's right. Well, as we look to sort of summarize this conversation, what would your advice be to oil field facility engineers, oil field operators who are looking at either a new site or the conversion of a bunch of existing sites to, be in compliance with changing regulations?
Yeah.
How do you think about turning pneumatic process controls from an afterthought into an asset?
Yeah. It just goes back to, putting a focus on it. Like you mentioned, the light switch, right? It's there. We use it all of the time.
All the time.
And until it breaks, we don't really think about it.
That's right.
So putting more thought into, that solution and what your goals are. If your long-term goals are, reducing emissions, increasing reliability and safety, taking those things in consideration and then saying, okay, what's the best solution to achieve those goals?
Right.
And nitrogen fits right into that. It's reliable, it's safe, it's a scalable solution.
Right.
And it's something that everybody can get behind because it's pneumatics, and everybody in our industry knows pneumatics.
They know pneumatics.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been really fun having this conversation, Kyle. And, listen, we understand, Kyle and I understand that maybe not everybody thinks about process control, oil field process controls and pneumatics like we do every day. It's kind of on our brain from when we wake up to when we go to bed. But I think that's also the power of the Kathairos Solutions and Kimray partnership is the fact that we can advise customers. We know what the best tricks are. We know what the changing regulations are. And if you want support in giving a little forethought to how you're designing your facilities for maximum reliability, maximum safety, and data transparency, we're here to help our clients do that. So we hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We're looking forward to the next conversations to come. And I would encourage you that if you have questions about oil field facilities, process controls, or pneumatics, please reach out to Kimray. They have amazing assets on their websites and training materials, and reach out to Kathairos Solutions to understand how we can help not only drive performance, but eliminate emissions associated with process controls and pneumatics at your site. With that, we'll talk to you later. Bye from Oklahoma City.